Hey guys, tonight we are going to abandon the comforts of central heating and high-speed internet to stand in the middle of a freezing void where the wind doesn't just blow, it hunts. You are going to experience the bone-deep chill of the 19th century American frontier, a place where survival wasn't a reality TV show concept, but a daily negotiation with a landscape that actively wanted you dead. It's going to be cold, it's going to be dark, and frankly, you probably won't survive this. At least not without losing a few toes or your sanity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love imagining you safe and warm while we talk about freezing to death. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the edge of the world. At least, that's what it feels like. You've just climbed down from the wagon, your boots crunching onto stiff, frost-rimmed grass that stretches out so far in every direction it actually makes you dizzy. This is the Great Plains. In the brochures back east, those glossy, optimistic pamphlets that promised a land of milk and honey, this place was painted as an agricultural paradise waiting for a plow. But standing here now, in the gray twilight of late November, it feels less like a farm and more like the surface of a very cold, very hostile moon. The first thing you notice isn't the cold itself, it's the scale of the place. It is a 360-degree prison of horizon. There are no trees. That's the detail your brain keeps tripping over, like a missing tooth you can't stop poking with your tongue. You are used to landscapes that have punctuation marks, hills, forests, buildings, something to stop the eye. Here, the landscape is a run-on sentence that screams into the void. Without trees to break up the view, the sky feels heavy, like a grand piano suspended by a string right above your head. It presses down on you, and then the wind hits you. On the prairie, the wind is not a weather event. It is a geological feature. It is a physical presence, as tangible as the dirt under your feet. Because there are no trees, no mountains, and no Walmarts to slow it down, the wind builds up momentum for hundreds of miles before it slams into your chest. It hits you with the subtlety of a freight train. It's a constant shoving force, stripping the heat from your body faster than you can generate it. You wrap your coat tighter, but the wind seems to understand the geometry of your clothing better than you do. It finds the gap at the collar, the space between the button and the fabric, the loose weave of your scarf. It feels personal, like nature is trying to frisk you for warmth. Historians still argue whether the distinct psychological phenomenon known as prairie madness was primarily caused by the crushing isolation of these spaces or if it was the acoustic torture of the wind itself. You can understand why they debate this. The sound is relentless. It's not the rustling of leaves or the howling through alleyways you might be used to. It is a high-pitched, hollow hissing sound. The sound of millions of blades of dry grass vibrating in unison. It sounds like the earth is leaking air. It's a white noise machine turned up to a volume that makes your teeth ache. You look at your family. They are huddled by the wagon, looking just as small and fragile as you feel. You have claimed your 160 acres under the Homestead Act, a mainstream historical fact that sounds heroic in textbooks but feels like a clerical error in practice. The government bet you 160 acres of land against 5 years of your life that you couldn't survive here. Standing in this gale, you realize the house always wins. The government gave you this land for free because in 1870, this land has a market value of absolutely nothing. It is a blank canvas, sure, but you have no paint, and the canvas is currently trying to give you hypothermia. The sun is beginning to dip below that razor-sharp horizon, and the temperature is dropping with it. It's not a gradual cooling, it's a plummet. The air here is dry, lacking the humidity that holds onto heat in the east. This means that as soon as the solar radiation is gone, the heat vanishes into space like a bank transfer on a Friday afternoon. You can feel the moisture on your eyes cooling. The wind, if anything, is picking up speed as the temperature gradients shift. You try to turn your back to it, but the wind on the prairie seems to come from everywhere at once. It swirls. It creates little eddies of freezing air that dance around your ankles. You realize that your modern concept of outdoors is flawed. In the modern world, Outdoors is the space between the car and the front door. Here, outdoors is a tyrant. It is a vast, indifferent machine. You are a soft, tropical organism evolved for the savannas of Africa, and you have voluntarily walked into a freezer that someone left open in a wind tunnel. There is a quirky, lesser-known detail about this wind that seasoned pioneers mention in their diaries: the static electricity. The air is so dry and the friction of the wind is so constant that the prairie becomes a giant generator. If you were to stroke a cat right now, it would probably look like a science experiment gone wrong. Men reported that their beards would crackle when they touched them, and horses' manes would sometimes spark in the twilight. It adds a layer of surrealism to the misery. You aren't just freezing, you are slowly becoming a battery. But you can't stand here admiring the electrophysics or the terrifying beauty of the sunset. The sunset is a timer. In the city, night meant gaslights, taverns, and the closing of shops. Here, night means death. If you do not get out of this wind, you will die. It is a simple binary equation. The cold is creeping through the soles of your leather boots, which, let's be honest, offer about as much thermal insulation as a folded newspaper. Your toes are already numb, checking out of the conversation early. You need shelter, but looking around, you see the cruel irony of the Great Plains. You need to build a house to block the wind, but there is nothing to build with. No timber for walls, no stones for a foundation, just grass. Endless, mocking grass. You're going to have to get creative, and you're going to have to be quick about it, because the temperature is dropping and the wind is screaming the news that winter has arrived and it has brought its luggage. You take a breath, the cold air stinging your lungs like inhaled needles, and prepare to do the impossible. Build a fortress out of dirt. You stare at the meager pile of lumber you hauled across 3 state lines. In the dimming light, it looks less like the raw materials for a home and more like a pile of expensive firewood that you are emotionally attached to. You have to build a house right now. Not next week, not after the zoning permit clears, but right now, before the sun finishes that slow dive into the horizon and the temperature drops from uncomfortable to lethal. If you were a wealthy rail baron, you might have had precious timber shipped in by train, perfectly milled and smelling of pine forests you can no longer see. But you are not a rail baron. You are a homesteader, which is essentially a professional gambler who pays with sweat instead of chips. The wood you have is green, cottonwood mostly, which has a delightful tendency to warp as soon as it dries, turning your doorframes into parallelograms and your floorboards into tripping hazards. You start the construction of what history books will generously call a claim shanty. In reality, this is a wooden box that would embarrass a modern garden tool shed. It's small, usually about 12 by 14 feet. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the size of a modern master bedroom, or perhaps a generous parking space. Into this architectural shoebox, you are expected to fit your entire life. Your sleeping quarters, your kitchen, your storage, and your family. It's the ultimate tiny house movement, but without the Instagram aesthetic or the clever storage solutions. The wind fights you for every board. You try to hold a plank upright to nail it into place, but the gale grabs it like a sail. You are wrestling with geometry. The hammer feels heavy in your hand, the handle slick with the cold sweat of panic. You strike your thumb, of course you do, and the pain is a dull throb because your hands are too cold to register the sharp, immediate sting. You shout a curse into the wind, but the sound is snatched away before it even reaches your own ears. As the walls go up, shaky and thin, you realize a terrifying truth. This isn't enough. A single layer of half-inch board against the Great Plains winter is like trying to stop a bullet with a wet napkin. The wind whistles through the tongue and groove joints. You can see daylight through the knot holes. This wooden shell is a suggestion of a house, not a reality. You need insulation, you need mass. You look down at your feet. The answer is the problem itself, the ground. The soil here isn't just dirt, it's sod. It is a dense, fibrous mat of ancient grass roots that have been tangling together since the last ice age. It is tough, heavy, and practically indestructible. Historians often refer to the settlers' homes as soddies, a cute name that belies the back-breaking labor involved in making one. You hook up the plow, or grab a spade if the horses are too spooked, and you start cutting. You are quarrying the earth. You cut long strips of turf, about a foot wide and 3 inches thick. The sound is a wet, tearing noise, rip, as the steel blade slices through millions of tiny root systems. It sounds like ripping thick canvas. You slice these strips into brick-sized blocks. Each one weighs about 50 pounds. You pick one up, it's damp, cold, and smells intensely of rich, rotting life. It smells like a grave, which is a thought you quickly push out of your mind. You start stacking these blocks around the outside of your fragile wooden shanty. You are essentially wrapping your wooden house in a thick blanket of dirt. You lay them grass side down. This is crucial. If you lay them grass side up, they might keep growing. And suddenly your living room wall is a pasture. By placing them grass side down, the roots flatten out and interlock with the layer below, creating a bond that is surprisingly strong. It's nature's Velcro. The physical exertion is agonizing. You lift a 50-pound block, walk it to the wall, heave it into place, and then go back for another. You do this hundreds of times. Your back screams, your shoulders burn, the dust from the dry soil mixes with the sweat on your face to form a muddy paste that gets into your eyes and mouth. You can taste the geography. It's gritty and mineral heavy. As the wall of dirt rises around your wooden frame, the sound of the wind changes. Inside the perimeter, the high-pitched hissing dulls down to a muted roar. The sod is working. It's dense. It's an incredibly effective thermal insulator. You are building a thermal battery out of the very thing that makes farming here so difficult. There is a fascinating, if slightly gross, quirk about these sod walls that you'll discover later. They are an entire ecosystem. You aren't just building a wall, you are relocating a habitat. The sod is full of bugs, worms, and dormant seeds. As the house warms up from your body heat, the wall thinks it's spring. You will eventually get used to the sight of a worm dangling from the ceiling or a wildflower sprouting from your bedroom wall. It gives bringing the outdoors in a literal and uninvited meaning. Debates still rage in architectural history circles about whether these structures were acts of genius adaptability or acts of desperate resignation. Some scholars argue that the sod house was a unique American invention, a perfect adaptation to a treeless environment. Others argue it was simply a reversion to Neolithic cave dwelling born of abject poverty. Standing there, wiping mud from your eyes, you don't care about the academic distinction, you just care that the wind has stopped hitting your skin directly. The sun is now a thin red line on the horizon, bleeding out into the gray. You have built a wooden skeleton and clothed it in flesh of earth. It is ugly, it is squat, dark, and looks like a mound of dirt that decided to stand up. If you saw this in a city, you would assume it was a pile of debris from a construction site. But to you, right now, it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It represents a pocket of still air. You shove the door closed, a flimsy thing made of scrap wood, and drop the latch. The silence inside is sudden and heavy. It's dark, obviously, because you haven't lit a lantern yet, but the darkness feels safer than the exposure outside. You have walls. They are made of the ground, they are damp, and they will probably drop dirt in your soup later, but they are walls. You lean your back against the rough timber frame, sliding down until you hit the dirt floor. You are exhausted in a way that modern humans rarely experience, a cellular exhaustion where your bones feel hollow. But you can't rest yet. As you sit there in the gloom, you feel a draft. It's a thin, icy finger of air poking you in the neck. You look at the walls. Despite your best efforts, the sod blocks aren't perfect bricks. The wooden boards have warped. There are gaps, thousands of tiny gaps. The wind is fluid. It finds every single imperfection in your work. You have built a fortress, yes, but your fortress is leaking, and the night is just getting started. You stare at the meager pile of lumber you hauled across 3 state lines. In the dimming light, it looks less like the raw materials for a home and more like a pile of expensive firewood that you are emotionally attached to. You have to build a house right now, not next week, not after the zoning permit clears, but right now, before the sun finishes that slow dive into the horizon and the temperature drops from uncomfortable to lethal. If you were a wealthy rail baron, you might have had precious timber shipped in by train, perfectly milled and smelling of pine forest you can no longer see. But you are not a rail baron. You are a homesteader, which is essentially a professional gambler who pays with sweat instead of chips. The wood you have is green, cottonwood mostly, which has a delightful tendency to warp as soon as it dries, turning your doorframes into parallelograms and your floorboards into tripping hazards. You start the construction of what history books will generously call a claim shanty. In reality, this is a wooden box that would embarrass a modern garden tool shed. It's small, usually about 12 by 14 feet. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the size of a modern master bedroom, or perhaps a generous parking space. Into this architectural shoebox, you are expected to fit your entire life. Your sleeping quarters, your kitchen, your storage, and your family. It's the ultimate tiny house movement, but without the Instagram aesthetic or the clever storage solutions. The wind fights you for every board. You try to hold a plank upright to nail it into place, but the gale grabs it like a sail. You are wrestling with geometry. The hammer feels heavy in your hand, the handle slick with the cold sweat of panic. You strike your thumb, of course you do, and the pain is a dull throb because your hands are too cold to register the sharp, immediate sting. You shout a curse into the wind, but the sound is snatched away before it even reaches your own ears. As the walls go up, shaky and thin, you realize a terrifying truth. This isn't enough. A single layer of half-inch board against the Great Plains winter is like trying to stop a bullet with a wet napkin. The wind whistles through the tongue and groove joints. You can see daylight through the knot holes. This wooden shell is a suggestion of a house, not a reality. You need insulation. You need mass. You look down at your feet. The answer is the problem itself, the ground. The soil here isn't just dirt, it's sod. It is a dense, fibrous mat of ancient grass roots that have been tangling together since the last ice age. It is tough, heavy, and practically indestructible. Historians often refer to the settlers' homes as soddies, a cute name that belies the back-breaking labor involved in making one. You hook up the plow or grab a spade if the horses are too spooked, and you start cutting. You are quarrying the earth. You cut long strips of turf about a foot wide and 3 inches thick. The sound is a wet, tearing noise. Shh, rip, as the steel blade slices through millions of tiny root systems. It sounds like ripping thick canvas. You slice these strips into brick-sized blocks. Each one weighs about 50 pounds. You pick one up. It's damp, cold, and smells intensely of rich, rotting life. It smells like a grave, which is a thought you quickly push out of your mind. You start stacking these blocks around the outside of your fragile wooden shanty. You are essentially wrapping your wooden house in a thick blanket of dirt. You lay them grass side down. This is crucial. If you lay them grass side up, they might keep growing, and suddenly your living room wall is a pasture. By placing them grass side down, the roots flatten out and interlock with the layer below, creating a bond that is surprisingly strong. It's nature's Velcro. The physical exertion is agonizing. You lift a 50-pound block, walk it to the wall, heave it into place, and then go back for another. You do this hundreds of times. Your back screams, your shoulders burn, the dust from the dry soil mixes with the sweat on your face to form a muddy paste that gets into your eyes and mouth. You can taste the geography. It's gritty and mineral heavy. As the wall of dirt rises around your wooden frame, the sound of the wind changes. Inside the perimeter, the high-pitched hissing dulls down to a muted roar. The sod is working. It's dense. It's an incredibly effective thermal insulator. You are building a thermal battery out of the very thing that makes farming here so difficult. There is a fascinating, if slightly gross quirk about these sod walls that you'll discover later. They are an entire ecosystem. You aren't just building a wall, you are relocating a habitat. The sod is full of bugs, worms, and dormant seeds. As the house warms up from your body heat, the wall thinks it's spring. You will eventually get used to the sight of a worm dangling from the ceiling or a wildflower sprouting from your bedroom wall. It gives bringing the outdoors in a literal and uninvited meaning. Debates still rage in architectural history circles about whether these structures were acts of genius adaptability or acts of desperate resignation. Some scholars argue that the sod house was a unique American invention, a perfect adaptation to a treeless environment. Others argue it was simply a reversion to Neolithic cave dwelling born of abject poverty. Standing there, wiping mud from your eyes, you don't care about the academic distinction, you just care that the wind has stopped hitting your skin directly. The sun is now a thin red line on the horizon, bleeding out into the gray. You have built a wooden skeleton and clothed it in flesh of earth. It is ugly. It is squat, dark, and looks like a mound of dirt that decided to stand up. If you saw this in a city, you would assume it was a pile of debris from a construction site. But to you, right now, it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. It represents a pocket of still air. You shove the door closed, a flimsy thing made of scrap wood, and drop the latch. The silence inside is sudden and heavy. It's dark, obviously, because you haven't lit a lantern yet, but the darkness feels safer than the exposure outside. You have walls. They are made of the ground, they are damp, and they will probably drop dirt in your soup later, but they are walls. You lean your back against the rough timber frame, sliding down until you hit the dirt floor. You are exhausted in a way that modern humans rarely experience, a cellular exhaustion where your bones feel hollow. But you can't rest yet. As you sit there in the gloom, you feel a draft. It's a thin, icy finger of air poking you in the neck. You look at the walls. Despite your best efforts, the sod blocks aren't perfect bricks. The wooden boards have warped. There are gaps, thousands of tiny gaps. The wind is fluid. It finds every single imperfection in your work. You have built a fortress, yes, but your fortress is leaking, and the night is just getting started. You are sitting in your sealed box, but the cold is still radiating from the walls like they are made of dry ice. The problem with sod is that while it's a good insulator compared to thin wood, it eventually freezes. Once that dirt freezes solid, it becomes a conductor. You are essentially living inside a giant ice cube tray. You need to leverage the one consistent heat source you have available, the planet itself. It's a fact of geology that once you get below the frost line, usually a few feet down, the Earth maintains a relatively constant temperature. It's not warm by modern standards, maybe 50 or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but compared to the 20 below zero nightmare outside, 55 degrees is tropical. You need to tap into that geothermal battery. This leads to the next phase of your architectural evolution, banking. It sounds like a financial term, but on the prairie, it means burying yourself alive on purpose. You go back outside. The wind tries to knock you over again, furious that you escaped it. You grab your shovel. You start digging a trench around the outside perimeter of your house. But you don't throw the dirt away. You pile it up against the walls. You are building a ramp of earth that slopes up from the ground to the eaves of your roof. You are effectively turning your house into a hill. The goal is to make the walls incredibly thick at the base, tapering up to the roof. You pile the dirt 3-4 feet high. You pack it down. You add more sod blocks. You are creating a thermal buffer zone. The wind can't hit your walls anymore because your walls are now buried under 3 feet of soil. The cold has to travel through feet of earth before it can even think about touching the inside of your house. This changes the look of your homestead dramatically. From a distance, your house no longer looks like a building. It looks like a gentle bump in the landscape, a molehill with a chimney. If a traveler were riding by at night, they might not even see your house until their horse walked onto your roof. This actually happened. There are recorded instances of cows, horses, and even confused visitors wandering onto the roof of a dugout or soddy and falling through. Imagine sitting down to dinner and having a heifer's leg punch through the ceiling. It gives dropping in for a meal a whole new urgency. But banking isn't just about piling dirt outside. Some of the smartest settlers, or the ones who listened to the indigenous tribes, realized that building up was the wrong direction. You should have built down. Many soddies were actually dugouts. You find a hillside or a ravine bank and you dig straight into it. The back wall and side walls are just the earth itself. The front wall is the only part you have to build. You are essentially living in a man-made cave. If you didn't dig into a hill, you might have dug a cellar-style house. You dig a pit, maybe 3 or 4 feet deep, and then build low walls on top of that. This means the floor of your house is 4 feet underground. Stepping into a dugout feels different. The silence is profound. The earth muffles everything, and the temperature is stable. It's cool in the summer and, crucially, not freezing in the winter. It harnesses the thermal inertia of the ground. It takes a long time for the earth to cool down. However, burying your house creates moisture issues. The walls weep, literally. Condensation forms on the cool earth. The floor is often muddy. Fungi find this environment delightful. You are sharing your bedroom with mushrooms. You might wake up to find a toad hopping across your pillow. It's a very damp existence. There is a scholarly debate about the health impacts of this subterranean life. Some historians argue the dampness caused rheumatism and respiratory issues, contributing to the harsh mortality rates. Others point out that escaping the wind chill saved countless lives, and a bit of arthritis was a fair trade for not freezing to death. It's the classic pioneer trade-off. Would you rather be damp and alive or dry and dead? But you aren't done insulating. You have the outside banked with earth. Now you look at the inside. The walls are still dirt. They are dark and they shed dust constantly. You need an interior liner. You don't have drywall. You don't have wallpaper. You have fabric. You take whatever cloth you can spare. Old bed sheets, canvas from a torn wagon cover, maybe even cheap muslin if you bought some at the trading post. You hang this cloth on the walls. This serves two purposes. First, it catches the dirt and bugs that fall out of the ceiling and walls, stopping them from landing in your food or your open mouth while you sleep. This ceiling cloth was often called a catch-all, and cleaning it was a horrifying weekly chore involving shaking out dead beetles and mouse droppings. Second, the cloth creates an air gap. Air is a great insulator if it's trapped. The layer of air between the cold dirt wall and the fabric adds another R value of insulation. It also brightens the room. The white or light colored cloth reflects the candlelight, making your cave feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Finally, you use your wardrobe as insulation. You don't have a closet, you have nails driven into the wall. You hang every piece of clothing you own on the walls. Coats, dresses, trousers, you hang them thick. A wall covered in wool coats is a warm wall. You are literally lining your nest with your own feathers. You stand in the center of your room. It is now a semi-subterranean bunker. The floor is grass. The walls are lined with sheets and hanging laundry. The outside is a mound of earth. The wind is raging outside. A blizzard is forming. But inside, the air is still. It's damp, it smells of earth, and it's dimly lit. But the biting edge of the cold is gone. You have created a microclimate. You have successfully separated yourself from the hostile atmosphere of the planet. But now, a new problem arises. You are warmish, but you are in the dark, and you need to cook, and you need to push the temperature from survivable to livable. You need fire. And that is when you realize the cruelest joke of the prairie. You have built a fireplace. You have a stove, but you are in a land without trees. You have absolutely nothing to burn. You are standing in front of your cast iron stove, the heavy, black metal heart of your home. In the East, or back in Europe, this stove was a symbol of civilization. It was where bread rose, where stews simmered, and where the family gathered to thaw out their frozen extremities. But here, in your sod fortress, the stove is currently just a very heavy, very cold paperweight. You open the iron door and peer into the firebox. It is empty. You instinctively turn to grab a log from the woodpile, a muscle memory ingrained in you since childhood, but your hand grasps only air. There is no woodpile. There are no logs. There isn't even a twig. You are experiencing the defining crisis of the prairie pioneer. You are a human being who needs fire to survive, living in a landscape that has seemingly been designed by an arsonist's worst nightmare, a place with absolutely nothing to burn. The Great Plains were originally mapped as the Great American Desert. Early explorers looked at this sea of grass and concluded that, since it couldn't support trees, it certainly couldn't support people. You are starting to think they had a point. The horizon is a flat line. If you climbed onto your roof and looked through a telescope, you might see a scrubby cottonwood tree nestled in a creek bed 10 miles away. But that tree is wet, green, and legally belongs to someone else. Or, more likely, it has already been chopped down by a desperate traveler who passed through last week. So, you have to burn what you have, and what you have is grass. Burning grass sounds simple enough. Grass burns, right? In the summer, a prairie fire is a terrifying wall of flame that moves faster than a horse can gallop. But capturing that energy inside a small iron box is a physics problem that will drive you to the brink of madness. Loose grass doesn't burn so much as it flashes. You stuff a handful of dry hay into the stove, light it, and poof, it's gone in a burst of heat and a cloud of acrid smoke. It lasts about 45 seconds. To keep the stove hot using loose hay, you would have to stand in front of it continuously, feeding it handfuls of grass like you are stoking the boilers of a steamship that is running late. You would never sleep, you would never eat, you would just be a conveyor belt of vegetation. So you learn to process the fuel. You learn to make cats. This is not a feline reference. A cat or a carrot is a tight bundle of hay. You take a handful of the tough long slough grass, dampen it slightly so it doesn't snap, and then you twist it. You twist it tight, folding the ends over to create a dense, hard figure eight or a stick. It looks a bit like an oversized fibrous pretzel. The density is the key. By compressing the grass, you reduce the airflow, forcing it to burn slower. It's the same principle as a log, just made of thousands of tiny stems. But making these cats is a job that never ends. You need hundreds of them for a single evening. Your hands, already cracked from the cold and the mud chinking, are now sliced by the razor-sharp edges of the grass. Your palms bleed, your wrists ache. The family becomes a manufacturing plant. While the adults work outside, the children sit on the floor, twisting hay. It is the 19th century equivalent of doom scrolling, a repetitive, mindless hand motion that consumes hours of your life while you stare blankly at the wall. Inventors, sensing a market of desperate people with bleeding hands, actually patented hay twisting machines. You might have bought one of these contraptions. It looks like a torture device crossed with a meat grinder. You feed grass into a hopper, turn a crank, and it spits out a compressed log of hay. It's a quirky historical tidbit that these machines were sold as labor-saving devices, which is a hilarious euphemism considering you still had to harvest the hay, dry the hay, haul the hay into the house, and then crank the handle until your shoulder dislocated. But even with the cats, the heat is fickle. Grass fires burn hot and fast. The stove glows cherry red, threatening to melt, and then 5 minutes later, it's stone cold. You are living in a thermal yo-yo. You wake up sweating, you wake up freezing. The ash production is astronomical. Grass is full of silica and minerals that don't burn. You have to shovel ash out of the stove constantly, dragging buckets of gray dust out into the wind, which promptly blows it back into your face. Historians and engineers still debate the actual efficiency of the so-called hay burner stoves. Some argue that the specialized designs, some of which used spring-loaded cylinders to automatically feed pressed hay into the firebox, were marvels of adaptation. Others argue they were dangerous, inefficient death traps that caused more house fires than they prevented. The truth, as you stand there singeing your eyebrows while trying to light a damp clump of switchgrass, is probably somewhere in the middle. They work, but they are a full-time job. If you are lucky, you have another option: corn. It feels sinful. Back east, corn is food. Corn is money. You grew this corn with your own sweat. You plowed the sod, planted the seeds, fought off the locusts, and harvested the ears. And now, you are going to open the stove door and throw your hard work into the fire. But when corn is cheap, and in the 18s the market is often flooded, it is sometimes cheaper to burn the corn than to sell it to buy coal. Corn cobs burn surprisingly well. They are dense, woody, and burn with a clean, hot flame. Red corn cobs are said to burn the best. The smell is distinct. Burning hay smells like a barn fire, grassy and sharp. Burning corn smells faintly of popcorn and toasted sugar. It is a cruel sensory taunt. Your house smells like a movie theater concession stand, but you are eating watery stew and shivering. You try to rationalize it. You tell yourself that a bushel of corn generates as much heat as a bushel of coal. A dubious claim, but one you cling to. You watch the yellow ears turn to black charcoal and then to white ash. It feels like burning dollar bills. It is a visceral demonstration of the economic reality of the frontier. Value is relative. Gold is useless here. Timber is priceless. And food is fuel. But the supply is limited. You can't burn your entire crop, or you'll have nothing to trade in the spring. And the hay requires too much labor. You need a fuel source that is abundant, free, and dense enough to hold a coal overnight. You need something that doesn't require hours of twisting or the sacrifice of your harvest. You look out the window at the frozen prairie. The landscape looks empty, but you know it isn't. Millions of massive beasts have walked this land for thousands of years. They have grazed on this grass, processed it through their four-chambered stomachs, and deposited the leftovers in convenient, pre-compressed briquettes all over the ground. You realize, with a sinking feeling in your stomach, that your survival depends on becoming a scavenger of excrement. You are going to have to go out there and pick up poop. The elegant, romantic vision of the pioneer life officially dies the moment you pick up your first burlap sack and head out to hunt for prairie coal. You are now a prospector, but unlike the frenzied men in California panning for nuggets of gold, or the silver barons of Nevada, your treasure hunt is significantly less glamorous. You are wandering the frozen prairie, a burlap sack dragged over your shoulder, or a wheelbarrow rattling over the uneven ground, scanning the earth for prairie coal. Let's not mince words. You are looking for buffalo poop. It is a humiliating demotion for a species that prides itself on architectural achievements and philosophical thought. One moment you are contemplating the vastness of the American destiny, and the next you are fighting a badger for a piece of dried dung. But out here, vanity is the first thing to freeze to death. You quickly learn that dignity does not keep the baby warm. Chips, as they are politely called, are the currency of survival. The American bison is a magnificent creature, a biological tank designed to convert rough cellulose into muscle. But for you, their most important contribution is their waste management. For centuries, millions of these animals migrated across these plains, leaving behind billions of droppings. In the arid, sun-baked summers, these droppings didn't decompose like they would in the wet forests of the east. Instead, they baked. The sun cured them, the wind desiccated them. They transformed from biological waste into perfect disc-shaped briquettes of compressed fiber. You spot one half buried in a drift of snow. To the untrained eye, it looks like a gray rock or a clump of dead moss. To you, it looks like a cozy evening. You kick it loose with the toe of your boot. It pops out of the frozen ground with a satisfying thwack. You pick it up. This is the moment where your city-dwelling sensibilities recoil, but your prairie-hardened brain takes over. It's surprisingly light. It feels less like organic waste and more like a piece of cork or heavy cardboard. It's dry, fibrous, and odorless. You toss it into the wagon. It lands with a woody clatter rather than a wet splat. That is the sound of success. There is a distinct connoisseurship to this scavenging. You are looking for the vintage chips. You want the ones that have weathered a season or two, bleached silver gray by the sun. These are the premium grade anthracite of the bovine world. They burn clean, hot, and with very little smoke. If you make the rookie mistake of picking up a green chip, one that is too fresh, you will regret it. A fresh chip doesn't burn, and it smolders, hisses, and fills your tiny airtight house with a stench that will make you envy the dead. Collecting chips is a family affair. It is often the specific chore of the children. You watch your kids running across the gray landscape, turning it into a game. They treat the chips like frisbees, scaling them at each other or seeing who can stack the highest pile in the wagon. It's a scene of innocent play superimposed over a backdrop of grim necessity. There is a dark humor in watching a 6-year-old proudly present you with a particularly large specimen as if it were a rare seashell found on the beach. "Good job, Timmy," you say. "That's a 3-hour burner right there." The quantity you need is staggering. A single winter night requires a mountain of chips. You aren't just filling a bucket, you are trying to fill a shed. A good homestead will have a pile of chips outside the door that rivals the house itself in size. In fact, in the bizarre social hierarchy of the plains, the size of your dung pile is a status symbol. If a neighbor rides by and sees a 10-foot stack of chips carefully pyramided against your wall, they nod in respect. That is a man who plans ahead. That is a family that is going to make it to March. Scholars and chemists have actually debated the caloric efficiency of the buffalo chip compared to European peat or hardwood. The general consensus is that while it lacks the intense BTU output of coal, it burns with a steady, peculiar consistency that is perfect for the cast iron stoves of the era. It acts more like charcoal than wood. It glows. It pulses with heat. But there is a sensory price to pay. When you start burning chips, the smell is distinct. It doesn't smell like a latrine, thankfully, because the bison eats only grass and herbs. The smoke has a pungent herbal quality. It smells like burning sagebrush mixed with old hay and a hint of musk. It is not exactly a fragrance you would find at a high-end candle store, eau de bison, but it becomes the scent of home. Every piece of clothing you own, every blanket, every strand of your hair will eventually smell like burnt grass. When you walk into the trading post in town, you don't need to tell anyone how you heat your home. Your aroma announces it before you even open your mouth. There is also the competition. You are not the only predator on the plains hunting for these brown discs. As the area around your homestead gets picked clean, you have to travel further and further afield. You might find yourself 3 miles from home, trespassing on a neighbor's claim, eyeing a pristine patch of chips. There is an unwritten law of the prairie. You don't touch another man's timber, and you don't touch another man's poop pile. But out on the open range, it's finders keepers. You might even find yourself in a race against the weather. If a heavy snow falls, the chips are buried. Then you have to dig for them, guessing at the lumps under the white blanket, or worse, the chips get wet. Wet chips are useless until they dry, which won't happen until May. So you see frantic harvesting parties in late November, families working with desperate speed as the gray clouds roll in, trying to get the harvest under a tarp before the blizzard hits. There is a quirky, almost festive evolution to this chore. In later years, when the desperation fades into nostalgia, towns will hold chip throwing contests. But right now, there is no sport in it. It is back-breaking labor. You bend down, pick up, toss. Bend, pick up, toss. Your hamstrings scream. The cold wind whips at your exposed neck. You are gathering hundreds of pounds of fuel, 1 ounce at a time. And you have to be careful what you pick up. The underside of a chip is a favorite hiding spot for scorpions, centipedes, and beetles seeking warmth. You learn to kick the chip over first, letting the angry wildlife scuttle away before you grab it. Nothing wakes you up faster than tossing a chip into the stove and watching a confused scorpion scuttle out onto your kitchen floor. As the wagon fills up, you look at your haul with a strange sense of satisfaction. It is ugly, it is brown, and it is literally the refuse of a passing herd. But to you, it represents bought time. Every chip is another 20 minutes of not freezing. Every chip is a cup of hot coffee. Every chip is a defiance of the empty landscape. You turn the wagon back toward your soddy. The sun is low, casting long, dramatic shadows across the snow. Your pile of prairie coal shifts and rumbles behind you. You are returning to your burrow like a triumphant hunter, bringing home the kill. Only your kill didn't run away, and it didn't put up a fight. It just waited there, patient and humble, the most unlikely savior in the history of human survival. You reach the house and start unloading, stacking the chips against the south wall where the sun might keep them dry. You grab a few for the evening's fire. You walk inside into the dim, earth-smelling quiet of your home. You open the stove door. The fire is low, just a bed of glowing red embers waiting for food. You toss in a chip. It lands on the coals. Smoke curls up, that familiar grassy, musky incense. The edges of the chip begin to glow orange. The heat radiates out, hitting your frozen face. It works. It actually works. But now that you have heat, you face a new problem. Fire needs to be managed. You can't just let it roar or you'll burn through your precious pile of dung in a week, and you can't let it go out because lighting a fire in a sub-zero house at 4 o'clock a.m. with frozen fingers is a near impossible task. You need to master the subtle, high-stakes art of keeping the fire asleep without killing it. The sun has finally abandoned you completely, leaving the world outside in a pitch-black void that feels heavy enough to crush the roof. Inside your soddy, the atmosphere has shifted. The frenetic energy of survival, the cutting, the digging, the chinking, the scavenging has faded into a quiet, exhausted tension. It is time to sleep, but you cannot simply blow out the candle and dive under the quilts. You have one final, high-stakes negotiation to make with the laws of thermodynamics. You have to bank the fire. In the modern world, climate control is a passive experience. You set a thermostat to 72 degrees and then ignore it for 6 months. If you get cold, you press a button. But here, heat is a living thing. It is a temperamental pet that you have to feed, groom, and tuck in at night. If you neglect it, it dies. And if the fire dies tonight, tomorrow morning isn't just going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be a medical emergency. Banking. The fire sounds like a financial transaction, which is fitting because heat is the only currency that matters out here. The goal is a paradox. You need to keep the fire burning, but you also need to stop it from burning. If you leave the vents open and the fuel exposed, the stove will roar happily for an hour, consume your entire day's collection of buffalo chips, and then burn out by midnight, leaving you to freeze at 3 o'clock a.m. You need to put the fire into a medically induced coma. You kneel before the cast iron stove. It is radiating a fierce localized heat that scorches your shins while your back remains cold. You open the door. The interior is a glowing landscape of orange and red, a miniature hellscape contained in iron. The smell of the burning buffalo chips, that grassy, sage-like incense, puffs out into the room. The process is delicate. First, you rake the living red coals together into a tight, glowing mound in the center of the grate. You are concentrating the thermal mass. Scattered coals die alone. Huddled coals survive. It is a metaphor for your own family, but you're too tired for symbolism right now. Next, you select your night log, or in this case, your night chip. You want the biggest, densest, most fossilized piece of bison waste you managed to find today. This is the designated survivor. You place it gently on top of the glowing mound. You don't want to crush the embers, but you want good contact. Now comes the counterintuitive part. You grab the small iron shovel and scoop up the gray powdery ash that is collected in the corners of the firebox. In a modern fireplace, ash is trash. Here, ash is a tool. You gently pour the ash over the glowing coals and your new fuel. You are burying the fire. You cover it completely until the orange glow is gone and all you see is a gray, dusty hill. To a novice, this looks like you are extinguishing the fire, but you are actually insulating it. You are suffocating the fire just enough to slow its metabolism down to a crawl. By cutting off the oxygen supply with a layer of ash, you force the fuel to smolder rather than flame. It turns the combustion process into a slow, agonizing decay that releases a trickle of heat over 8 hours instead of a flood of heat over 1. You close the iron door and latch it tight. You adjust the dampers, the little vents that control airflow, closing them until they are mere slivers. You are choking the stove. You listen. The roar of the draft quiets down to a faint, rhythmic purr. The stove is now asleep. This ritual is the source of significant anxiety. Every pioneer describes the specific, gnawing dread of the morning reveal. There is no guarantee you did it right. If you used too much ash, you choked it to death. If you used too little, it burned through the fuel and died of starvation. You won't know the outcome until you wake up in the freezing, pre-dawn dark. Historians and experimental archaeologists often argue about the effectiveness of buffalo chip ash versus wood ash for this specific task. The consensus leans towards the chips. Because the buffalo diet is high in silica, sand, and glass from the grass, the ash is heavy and gritty. It forms a crust that is remarkably airtight. It is a quirky chemical accident that the fuel source provided by the animal also produces the perfect byproduct to preserve itself. It's a closed-loop system of bovine thermodynamics. But let's talk about the consequences of failure. Let's say you wake up tomorrow and the stove is cold. Stone cold. The water in the bucket is frozen solid. The air in the room is 5 degrees below zero. You have no lighter fluid. You have no propane torch. You have a flint and steel oils, or perhaps a precious, expensive box of lucifer matches that you guard with your life. Lighting a fire in a sub-zero stove with damp fuel and fingers that are shaking so hard you can't hold a match is a special kind of torture. The cold metal sucks the heat out of the kindling before it can catch. The smoke refuses to go up the cold chimney, filling the room with a freezing gray fog. It is a miserable, cursing, tear-filled ordeal that sets a terrible tone for the day. If you really can't get it started, you have to face the ultimate humiliation, borrowing fire. This is a real historical practice that feels like a fable. You have to take your metal bucket, wrap yourself in your coat, and walk a mile or two across the snow to your nearest neighbor. You knock on their door, shivering and defeated. They open it, blasting you with the warm, smug air of competent fire management. You ask, head hung low, if you can have some coals. They will give them to you, of course. The Pioneer Code demands it. They shovel some glowing embers into your bucket. But the look in their eyes says everything. It says, "You didn't bank it right, did you?" It is the 19th century equivalent of asking a neighbor to jumpstart your car because you left the lights on. It marks you as a rookie. Then you have to sprint back to your house, bucket swinging, praying the wind doesn't blow the embers out or that the heat doesn't melt the bottom of the bucket before you get home. So you double check the dampers. You stare at the gray ash mound one last time. You are trying to mind meld with the combustion reaction, urging it to hold on. The room is already cooling down. The fierce heat of the stove is fading into a gentle residual warmth. The walls, those damp earthen barriers, are holding the chill at bay, but they are fighting a losing battle against the night. You can feel the temperature gradient shifting. The floor is cold, the ceiling is warm, you are living in a stratified atmosphere. You stand up, your knees cracking in the silence. The wind outside is still hammering the north wall, a relentless rhythmic thudding that sounds like someone kicking a mattress, but the fire is safe. Hopefully, you have done your part, you have fed the beast and put it to sleep. Now, your body realizes that it has needs too. In all the excitement of building, insulating, and scavenging for poop, you forgot to eat, and your body is demanding calories, not for pleasure. Cuisine is a distant memory, but for internal fuel. You need to stoke your own internal furnace before you lie down, or you will freeze from the inside out. It's time to look into the pot that has been simmering on that stove all day and see what grim culinary lottery you have won tonight. You turn away from the sleeping stove, your hands dusted with the gray ghost of buffalo grass. The fire is banked, the draft is choked, and the room is settling into a deep, hazy twilight. But the cold is a persistent creature. It's not just clawing at the windows anymore, it's gnawing at your ribs. You realize that while you fueled the iron box in the corner, you haven't fueled the biological engine that keeps you alive. It is time for dinner. To call the evening meal on the frontier dinner implies a level of culinary choice and table service that simply does not exist here. It is not a dining experience, it is a refueling operation. You are not eating for flavor or for texture or for the delicate interplay of acids and fats, you are eating for BTU output. You are shoveling combustible material into your stomach in the desperate hope that your metabolism can burn it hot enough to keep your blood liquid until sunrise. You lift the heavy lid of the cast iron Dutch oven that has been sitting on the back of the stove all day. A cloud of steam hits your face. It smells dense. It smells of salt, pork fat, and boiled ambition. This is the perpetual stew, a pioneer staple that sits on the heat for days, evolving but never really changing. You add new ingredients to the top and you eat from the bottom. It is a geological column of nutrition. The star of tonight's show, and every night's show, is salt pork, or sobelly, as the locals affectionately call it. It is the bacon of the apocalypse. It is a slab of white pork fat, cured in enough salt to dehydrate a camel, and packed in barrels that traveled 1,000 miles by wagon. It doesn't rot, it doesn't spoil, it just waits. When you pull a piece out of the barrel, it is stiff and coated in white crystals. You have to soak it for hours just to make it edible, and even then, eating it feels like licking a salt lick while chewing on a rubber tire. But you don't eat it for the taste. You eat it for the grease. In the modern world, grease is a dirty word, something to be dabbed off pizza with a napkin. Here, grease is life. Fat is the most energy-dense substance you can find. It burns slow and hot in the body. A lean rabbit or a venison steak might taste better, but rabbit starvation, protein poisoning from a lack of fat, is a real way to die out here. You need the lard. You need the calories to coat your insides. You ladle the stew into tin plates. The tin is hot, searing your fingers, but it cools rapidly in the drafty room. The stew is a slurry of beans, likely navy beans, hard as rocks unless boiled for an eternity, and cornmeal dumplings that have the density of depleted uranium. The dumplings are there to expand in your stomach, to give you that heavy, leaden feeling of fullness that tricks your brain into thinking you are satisfied. There is a scholarly debate among food historians about the prevalence of scurvy on the plains during these winters. Some argue that the diet was woefully deficient in vitamin C, leading to widespread low-level scurvy that made people lethargic and depressed, symptoms often mistaken for cabin fever. Others point to the consumption of wild onions, rose hips, or even raw potatoes, eaten with vinegar, as evidence of folk remedies that kept the disease at bay. As you stare at your bowl of brown sludge, you aren't thinking about vitamins. You are just hoping there's a piece of pork in there big enough to chew on. You sit down. There is no dining table. The room is too small for such luxuries. You sit on a wooden crate or on the edge of the bed, balancing the hot plate on your knees. The family eats in silence. The only sounds are the scraping of spoons on tin and the howling of the wind outside. Conversation is sparse because eating is serious business. Also, chewing takes effort. The bread, if you have it, is likely sod cornbread, cornmeal mixed with water and salt. baked on a hoe or in a skillet. It is coarse and gritty, because millstones were often made of soft stone, or simply because the wind blew dust into the flour barrel. Pioneer bread is abrasive. You are literally wearing down your teeth with every bite. By the time you are 40, your molars will be flat surfaces. It's early dentistry by attrition. And to wash it down, coffee, or at least a warm, dark liquid that identifies as coffee. Real coffee beans are expensive and hard to get, so you improvise. You might be drinking coffee made from roasted barley, parched corn, or dried peas. Some desperate souls even roasted dandelion roots or okra seeds. It tastes burnt, bitter, and thin, but it is hot. And heat is the point. You wrap your hands around the tin mug, using it as a personal radiator. You hold the liquid in your mouth before swallowing, letting the heat seep into your gums. There is a quirky historical sidebar regarding the Arbuckle's coffee brand. It was so dominant on the frontier that Arbuckle's became a synonym for coffee. Each package came with a stick of peppermint candy inside. There were recorded instances of grown men, hardened cowboys, and homesteaders drawing guns on each other over who got the peppermint stick. Tonight, there is no peppermint. There is only the bitter, muddy water of roasted grain. As you eat, you can feel your body reacting. The heavy fat and carbohydrates hit your stomach like a brick. This is intentional. You are inducing thermogenesis. Digestion is an exothermic reaction. Your body produces heat as it breaks down food. By eating a heavy, hard-to-digest meal right before bed, you are forcing your internal organs to work overtime while you sleep. Your stomach becomes a secondary furnace. You are stoking the boiler room of your own biology. This is why you don't eat salad in a blizzard. Salad is cold and burns up in minutes. You want food that fights back. You want food that sits in your gut like a warm stone for 6 hours. You are essentially hibernating, and like a bear, you need that layer of internal fuel. But the meal comes with a price. The salt, the pork is salty, the beans are salty, the cornbread is salty. As soon as you finish eating, a terrible thirst sets in. Your tongue feels like sandpaper. You need water. This brings you to the next logistical nightmare of the evening. In a modern home, you walk to the sink and turn a handle. Here, the water supply is a bucket in the corner. And because of the laws of physics and the sub-zero temperatures radiating through the floor, that water is currently in the process of undergoing a phase change. You look at the bucket. A thin skin of ice has already formed on the surface. You break it with the ladle, crack, and dip out a drink. The water is painfully cold. It hurts your teeth. As it hits your stomach, you can feel it cooling down the stew you just ate, fighting against the heat you are trying to generate. It's a zero-sum game. You need the water to survive the salt, but the water steals your warmth. You finish the last scrap of fat, wiping the grease from the plate with a crust of cornbread. You are full. You feel heavy, lethargic, and greasy. Your skin feels tight from the dry air and the salt, but you are warmer. The internal fire is lit. The external fire is banked. The walls are sealed. You look around the dim room. The candle is burning low, casting long, dancing shadows against the fabric-lined walls. The family is finishing up, the clatter of tin plates dying down. The routine of the evening is almost complete, but there is one final check to perform before you can surrender to the quilts. You have to deal with the water bucket properly, because if you leave that bucket sitting on the floor overnight, by morning it won't just be water. It will be a solid block of ice that will split the wood and leave you melting snow for breakfast. You stare at the water bucket sitting in the corner. It looks innocent enough. A simple cedar pail with iron bands holding about 3 gallons of the most precious liquid on the plains. But you know better. In this temperature, that bucket is a ticking time bomb. It is a structural failure waiting to happen. You are currently living in a physics experiment. The air in your soddy is stratified. Up near the ceiling, where the heat from the stove rises and gets trapped by the fabric liner, it might be a balmy 40 degrees. At waist height, it's hovering around freezing. But down on the floor, where the bucket sits, it is the Arctic. The draft from the door and the deep, penetrating chill of the ground create a death zone for liquids. If you leave that bucket on the floor overnight, the laws of thermodynamics will turn hostile. Water, in a display of chemical arrogance, expands when it freezes. It doesn't just get hard, it gets bigger. A wooden bucket relies on the tension of the iron bands to keep the staves together. When the water freezes solid, it pushes outward with thousands of pounds of pressure. It will snap those iron bands like dry twigs or split the cedar staves wide open. You will wake up to the sound of a gunshot, only to find your bucket ruined and your water supply lying on the floor in a solid, shattered block. And if you are lucky enough to have a tin or zinc bucket, a modern luxury, the ice will simply bulge the bottom out until the bucket becomes a convex wobble board that can never sit flat again. Or it will split the soldered seams, meaning tomorrow's water run will involve a trail of leaks all the way from the creek. So, you have to tuck the water in. First, you elevate it. You lift the heavy pail off the floor and place it on a bench, a crate, or even the sturdy family trunk. You are moving it out of the sub-zero floor zone and up into the slightly less lethal air. Every inch of elevation counts. Next, you insulate it. It feels ridiculous, like you are swaddling a baby made of oak and iron, but you take a spare blanket or an old coat and wrap it around the bucket. You aren't trying to keep the water warm, exactly. You are trying to slow the rate of heat loss. You want the freezing process to be lazy. You want to delay the formation of the ice core until the sun comes up. Some families, the ones who really understand the thermodynamics of the Saudi, will place the bucket right next to the stove. Not on it. You don't want the water to boil away, but in the radiant shadow of the cast iron. The hope is that the faint, dying heat of the banked fire will radiate just enough infrared energy to keep the water molecules moving. It's a delicate dance. Too close, and the wood dries out and shrinks, causing leaks. Too far, and it freezes. There is a grim bit of folklore regarding the morning ice. It became a standard unit of measurement for pioneer misery. You don't ask a neighbor, "How cold was it last night?" You ask, "How thick was the ice in the bucket?" A skim ice morning is a good day. A 2-inch morning means you slept fully clothed. A solid to the bottom morning means you are lucky you didn't wake up dead. This constant battle with the water supply highlights a massive sanitary blind spot of the era. You have one bucket, you have one ladle, usually a hollowed out gourd or a tin dipper. Everyone drinks from it. Dad, mom, the kids, the visiting preacher, the coughing neighbor. The ladle goes into the bucket, into a mouth, and back into the bucket. It is a microbiological swap meet. Historians and epidemiologists often look at the spread of diphtheria, scarlet fever, and influenza on the frontier and point accusingly at the common cup. In a sealed, unventilated sod house where the air is recycled and the water is a communal soup of saliva, germs didn't just spread, they threw parties. But you don't think about that. Germ theory is still a vague academic concept to you. You just know that if you don't drink, you die of dehydration. And the water is right there, blissfully clear and cold. Speaking of getting water, you might wonder, why not just melt snow? You are surrounded by it. The prairie is covered in white drifts. Why haul heavy buckets from a frozen creek when you can just scoop up the yard? Because snow is a scam. Snow is mostly air. You fill a massive pot with snow, pack it down, and put it on the stove. You burn precious buffalo chips to melt it. And what do you get? About an inch of dirty, gritty water. The fuel to liquid exchange rate is terrible. You would burn your entire winter's supply of fuel just to stay hydrated. Plus, snow water tastes flat and often carries the flavor of whatever dust or soot has settled on it. So, you protect the creek water with your life. There is also a fringe debate among frontier historians about the use of warm stones in the water bucket. Some diaries mention heating a large river stone in the fire and dropping it into the bucket before bed. It acts as an immersion heater, releasing warmth for hours. It's a brilliant idea, provided the stone is clean. It isn't, and it doesn't burn a hole in the bottom of the bucket. It might. Most people just rely on the blanket and a prayer. You check the bucket one last time. It is wrapped in an old woolen vest, sitting on a crate near the stove. It looks safe. You have secured the perimeter, the walls. You have secured the heat, the stove, and you have secured the fluids, the bucket. Now, you have to secure the biological assets. You look at the bed. In a sod house, the bed is not a piece of furniture. It is a location. It is often just a frame of poles nailed into the dirt wall, strung with ropes to hold a mattress. The mattress itself is a tick, a large fabric sack filled with straw, corn husks, or if you are wealthy, feathers. Tonight, that mattress looks like a life raft. The floor is freezing, the air is cooling, the only source of heat left in the room, besides the fading stove, is the metabolic output of your family. You realize that the Victorian concepts of personal space and privacy are about to be sacrificed on the altar of survival. You are about to engage in a nightly game of family Tetris, where the goal is to pack as many bodies into as small a space as possible to create a singular, collective organism of warmth. You look at your spouse, your children, maybe even the dog. You aren't seeing individuals anymore. You are seeing 98.6-degree heat radiators, and you need to arrange them for maximum thermal efficiency. You turn your attention to the corner of the room where the bed is anchored. In a modern context, a bed is a sanctuary of solitude or intimacy. It is a private island where you retreat to escape the world. But here, on the frozen prairie, the bed is a communal life raft. It is the only place in the house where the temperature is guaranteed to stay above survival levels, provided you follow the strict laws of biological engineering. You are about to engage in a nightly ritual that would horrify a Victorian etiquette coach but makes perfect sense to a penguin. The family Tetris. The concept of personal space is a luxury that requires central heating. When the ambient temperature of your bedroom is 5 degrees, privacy effectively means freezing to death alone. To survive, you must abandon the idea of being an individual and accept your new role as a component in a collective heat engine. You are no longer a person. You are a BTU generator with elbows. The bed itself is likely a rope bed. It's a wooden frame with ropes woven across it in a grid pattern. You have to tighten these ropes periodically with a wooden key because they stretch and sag, which is where the phrase "sleep tight" comes from. On top of this grid sits the tick, that massive fabric sack filled with straw or corn husks. It rustles when you move. It smells of a barn. And over time, the filling breaks down into a fine dust that puffs out every time you roll over, making you sneeze in your sleep. You look at the size of the bed. It's maybe 4.5 feet wide. You look at your family. There are 5 of you. The math doesn't seem to work, but necessity is a cruel mathematician. You aren't sleeping side by side in a civilized row. You are spooning. You are interlocking. You are creating a solid block of humanity. The strategy is military in its precision. The smallest and most vulnerable members of the unit, the children, go in the middle. This is the core. It is the warmest, safest spot, insulated on all sides by living flesh. The baby, if there is one, is practically buried in the center, a tiny ember protected by the logs. The adults take the flanks. You and your spouse take the outer edges. This is the sacrificial position. One side of your body is pressed against the warm, breathing mass of your children. The other side is exposed to the room, facing the cold, damp wall or the drafty darkness. You are the insulation. You are the heat shield. Throughout the night, you might silently coordinate a rotation, flipping over to warm your frozen back while your front cools down, like a rotisserie chicken turning on a slow spit. There is a distinct sensory reality to this arrangement that history books tend to gloss over. They paint a picture of cozy familial bonding. The reality is a lot more aromatic. You are all unwashed. Baths are a weekly or monthly ordeal involving heating water on the stove, so in the dead of winter, hygiene takes a backseat to hypothermia prevention. You all smell like wood smoke, sweat, stale wool, and onions. You are breathing each other's air. You are inhaling the carbon dioxide exhaled by your toddler. It is intimate in a way that is both comforting and slightly suffocating. And then there are the limbs. Sleeping 5 people in a 4-foot space requires a level of choreography that would impress a ballet troupe. No one can move independently. If you need to roll over, everyone needs to roll over. It's a synchronized wave of grumbling and rustling straw. You wake up with a knee in your back, an elbow in your ear, or a foot in your face. You learn to sleep in a rigid, plank-like paralysis to avoid waking the baby. But the crowd in the bed isn't always limited to your immediate genetic line. This is where the frontier hospitality gets truly weird. Travelers on the plains were frequent, and shelters were rare. If a stranger knocked on your door in a blizzard, you didn't just let them in. You often had to let them in. Into the bed, Diaries from the era detail the awkward, polite shuffle of bundling, where a traveling preacher, a peddler, or a lost cowboy would be invited to sleep in the family bed because sleeping on the floor meant freezing. Imagine the scene. You, your spouse, 3 kids, and a random guy named Jeb who smells like a wet horse, all lined up under the quilts like sardines. There was a strict etiquette to this. The guest was usually placed on the outside edge or separated by a bundling board, a plank of wood, or simply by the sheer volume of clothing everyone was wearing. It turns the bed into a bizarre social experiment. Good night, honey. Good night, kids. Good night, strange man we just met. Historians debate the moral panic this caused back east. Editors in New York wrote scathing editorials about the degeneracy of frontier sleeping arrangements. They clearly had never spent a night in a Nebraska soddy at 30 below. Out here, morality is dictated by the thermometer. If sleeping next to a stranger saves your toes, you make room for the stranger. And let's not forget the non-human heaters. If you were smart, you brought the dogs in. The phrase 3-dog night isn't just a classic rock band. It's a thermal rating system. A 1-dog night is cold. A 2-dog night is bitter. A 3-dog night is so freezing that you need 3 large furry animals in the bed with you to survive. The dogs are welcome into the pile. They are heavy, they have higher body temperatures than humans, and they act as living space heaters. Sure, they have fleas, and they might chase a rabbit in their sleep and kick you in the shins, but a 70-pound sheepdog curled up at your feet is better than a hot water bottle. Even the cat gets involved, usually finding the prime real estate on someone's neck or chest, purring like a tiny diesel engine. The bed becomes a multi-species ecosystem, a pile of mammals clinging to life on a rock floating in space. As you stand there, staring at the designated sleeping zone, you feel a wave of claustrophobia war with your desire for warmth. You know that once you get into that pile, you are trapped. If you have to pee in the middle of the night, extracting yourself is a mission impossible involving contortionist skills and the risk of waking the entire colony. Most people just hold it. The chamber pot is under the bed, frozen and uninviting. You decide that dehydration is preferable to the ordeal of leaving the nest. But before you can dive into this pile of humanity, you have one more layer of defense to prepare. In the modern world, you strip down to pajamas, light cotton, silk, maybe just your underwear. Here, stripping down is suicide. You don't take clothes off to go to bed. You might actually put more on. You look down at your outfit. You are wearing wool trousers, a flannel shirt, a vest, and heavy socks. And you are thinking, I should probably put on a hat. You are about to enter the sleeping fully clothed phase of the evening, a sensory nightmare where you never quite feel clean, never quite feel free, and your skin is in a constant itchy battle with coarse fabrics. In the modern world, the act of going to bed is defined by the removal of barriers. You shed the armor of the day, the stiff jeans, the button-down shirts, the restrictive bras and belts, and slip into something designed purely for comfort. Cotton, silk, maybe nothing at all. It is a ritual of liberation. Here, in the sod house, going to bed is not a liberation. It is a fortification. You do not strip down, you layer up. You stand by the bed, looking at your family, and instead of unbuttoning your shirt, you are actually debating whether you should put on a second coat. The fabric of your life, literally, is wool, and not the soft chemically treated merino wool you can buy at an airport gift shop today. This is homespun or roughshod trade wool. It is coarse, it is heavy, and it is aggressively itchy. It feels less like fabric and more like a carpet made of scouring pads. Wearing it against your skin is a constant, low-level, sensory hazing ritual. But you wear it because wool has a magical property that cotton lacks. It stays warm even when it's wet. And you are wet. This is the dirty secret of the pioneer winter. You are constantly damp. You spent the day sweating while you chopped ice and hauled buffalo chips. Now that you've stopped moving, that sweat is cooling on your skin. If you were wearing cotton, that moisture would turn cold and clammy, sucking the heat out of you like a wet wick. But the wool absorbs the moisture into its hollow fibers and actually generates a tiny amount of heat as it does so, a chemical reaction called heat absorption. It is a miracle of nature, but it feels gross. You feel like you are wrapped in a damp, scratchy sheepdog that hasn't been washed in a year. You look down at your boots. To take them off or not to take them off? This is a genuine tactical dilemma. If you take them off, your feet will be freezing within 10 minutes. The blood flow to your extremities slows down as you sleep, and sticking your bare toes into the cold zones of the bed is asking for chilblains. Plus, if there is an emergency, a spark from the stove, a wolf scratching at the door, or the roof caving in, trying to lace up frozen leather boots in the dark is impossible. But if you keep them on, you restrict circulation. Your feet swell, and you drag mud and manure into the bed, which violates the one rule of civilization you have left. The compromise is the loosen and sprawl. You unlace the boots completely, letting the leather tongue flop open. You keep them on your feet, acting as hard-shelled slippers. This keeps the heat in but allows the blood to flow. Of course, this means you are sleeping with hard, hobnailed soles kicking your spouse in the shins all night. It's not romantic, but it preserves your toes. Then there is the headgear. In the 21st century, wearing a hat to bed suggests you are an eccentric character in a Charles Dickens novel. Here, it is mandatory safety equipment. You lose a massive amount of heat through your head. So, you pull on a nightcap. This isn't a cute pointed hat with a pom-pom. It's usually your day cap, a knitted wool toque, or a scarf wrapped tightly around your ears. You go to sleep looking like you are about to rob a bank. There is a pervasive historical myth, or perhaps a half-truth, that pioneers were sewn into their long underwear for the winter. The story goes that in November, you put on your union suit and someone literally stitched it shut so you wouldn't be tempted to take it off until spring. Historians debate whether this was a widespread practice or just a tall tale told to shock city folk. Most evidence suggests it was an exaggeration of a grim reality. You simply didn't take it off. Why would you? To be naked is to freeze. So you wear the same layer of red flannel against your skin for 4-5 months straight. The fabric becomes a second skin, stiff with salt and dead cells. You stop noticing the smell after week 3. It becomes your personal atmosphere. So here you are. You are wearing 2 shirts, a vest, a coat, heavy trousers, 2 pairs of socks, unlaced boots, and a hat. You are bulky, you are stiff, movement is difficult. When you lie down, you don't relax into the mattress. You sort of tip over and land like a fallen tree. You wedge yourself into the family Tetris pile. The wool of your coat grinds against the wool of your spouse's coat. The friction creates static electricity. In the pitch black, if you move quickly, blue sparks might shoot off the blankets. You are a highly flammable, electrically charged, wool-encased sausage. The physical sensation is claustrophobic. You are trapped in your clothes, trapped in the bed, trapped in the house. Your skin itches, screaming for air and light, but you suppress the urge to scratch because moving breaks the seal of warmth you are trying to build. You lie there, listening to the wind, feeling the damp weight of your own survival gear pressing down on you. But you aren't done burying yourself yet. You have your personal armor on, but the bed needs its own fortifications. You look at the pile of quilts sitting at the foot of the bed. These aren't just blankets. They are heavy, layered engineering projects, and arranging them is the final, critical step before you can close your eyes. You are now a structural component of the bed, wedged between your snoring youngest child and the freezing outer edge of the mattress. But even with your wool armor and the collective metabolism of your family, you aren't safe yet. The air in the room is still a predator circling the bed, looking for any gap to steal the heat you've worked so hard to generate. This is where the engineering comes in. You reach for the final layer of defense, the quilts. In a modern home, a blanket is a single piece of factory-made polyester that you buy at a big box store. If it's cold, you just turn up the dial. Here, a quilt is a topographical map of your family's history and a masterclass in thermal insulation. These aren't just bed covers. They are massive, heavy artifacts of survival. If a weighted blanket today is marketed as a way to reduce anxiety, the 19th century prairie quilt was designed to physically pin you to the bed so the wind couldn't blow your soul away. You begin the layering process. The order is not random, it is governed by the laws of thermodynamics. First, you don't put all the blankets on top. You need a foundation layer. You place a thick, heavy quilt, likely one made of old wool trousers and coat scraps, directly on top of the straw tick. This is your thermal break. The mattress is full of air and straw, which is great, but the cold from the ground still radiates up through the bottom of the bed. You are essentially building a sandwich where you are the filling, and you need a bottom crust to stop the moisture and chill from seeping in. Then come the top layers. You reach for the log cabin quilt. This is a mainstream historical fact of the frontier. The log cabin pattern was the most popular design of the 19th century. It consists of strips of fabric built around a central square. Traditionally, if the center square was red, it represented the hearth and the fire. If it was yellow, it represented a lamp in the window. You pull the red-centered quilt up to your chin. It feels like pulling a lead shield over your body. Historians still engage in a lively, scholarly debate over whether these quilt patterns contained hidden semiotic codes, specifically whether certain arrangements like the log cabin or North Star were used as signals for travelers or even participants in the Underground Railroad. On the prairie, however, the debate is more practical. Did the dark side of the quilt, usually made of heavier wools, actually trap more heat than the light side made of cottons? You don't care about the symbolism right now, you just care about the R value. As you add more layers, the 9 patch, the Star of Bethlehem, the crazy quilt, the weight becomes significant. You aren't just under a blanket, you are under 25 pounds of fabric, and it presses down on your chest, making your breathing slow and rhythmic. It's an involuntary form of deep pressure therapy. You feel like a fossil being preserved in a layer of textile strata. But there is still the foot problem. No matter how many quilts you stack, your feet are at the end of the circulatory line. They are the first outpost to be abandoned by your heart when things get dicey. To solve this, you reach for the soapstone. This is a quirky fringe tidbit of pioneer life. The soapstone was the 19th century version of a rechargeable battery. It's a dense, soft rock that you've had sitting on the edge of the stove all evening. It has absorbed a massive amount of thermal energy. You wrap the scorching hot stone in a thick piece of flannel so you don't actually cook your toes and slide it under the covers at the foot of the bed. The sensation is divine. A localized burst of dry heat radiates through your socks. You and your spouse take turns pressing your heels against it, fighting over the prime real estate like two cats over a sunbeam. Sometimes, if you're out of soapstones, you might use a flat iron, the kind used for pressing shirts, or even a heavy pancake griddle. Anything that can hold a calorie is drafted into service. The quilts also serve a secondary purpose. They are your air filters. The air in the soddy is full of dust, smoke from the buffalo chips, and the fine dander of the straw mattress. You pull the top quilt up over your nose, leaving just a tiny blowhole for oxygen. The fabric filters the air, warming it slightly before it hits your lungs. It smells of cedar, if you had a chest to store them in, old sweat, and the faint sweet scent of the dried grass inside the mattress. You lie there completely encased. You are a biological engine inside a wool and cotton fortress, which is inside a sod bunker, which is in the middle of a frozen void. The outside feels like a concept from another planet. You can hear the house groaning. The wood of the bed frame is contracting in the cold, making sharp crack sounds that echo in the dark. The wind is still hitting the north wall with the sound of a distant surf. Every now and then, a fine dusting of snow or dirt might sift down from the ceiling, landing on the top quilt with a sound like dry rain. You don't even flinch. The catch-all cloth you hung earlier is doing its job, but the prairie is persistent. It wants in. There is a strange comfort in the weight. In the modern world, we equate comfort with lightness, lightweight down, thin tech fabrics. But here, safety is heavy. You feel anchored. You are pinned to the earth by the handiwork of your mother, your grandmother, and your own tired fingers. Each scrap of fabric in the quilt is a memory. A piece of a wedding dress, a scrap from a child's first shirt, a remnant of a Sunday coat. You are literally being kept alive by the ghost of your family's wardrobe. The soapstone at your feet is beginning its slow transition from hot to warm. The family pile has settled. The rustling of the straw has stopped. You feel the heat of the person next to you, a steady rhythmic warmth that matches your own. You are winning. For tonight, you have out-engineered the frost. But as you drift toward that heavy, quilt-pressed sleep, you hear a sound from just outside the door. It's not the wind, it's a low, guttural huffing, followed by the sound of something heavy rubbing against the exterior sod wall. You realize that while you are trying to stay warm inside, there are other living heaters outside who are just as desperate for shelter as you are, and they might be looking to use your house as a windbreak. The huffing sound against your wall continues. It's a rhythmic, heavy sound. The sound of a massive pair of lungs working in the sub-zero air. You don't reach for your rifle though. You know that sound. It's Bessie, or perhaps the oxen. They've moved from the center of their meager corral to the leeward side of the house, pressing their massive, shivering flanks directly against your sod walls. They aren't trying to break in, they are just doing the same math you are. They are seeking a windbreak, and they've realized that your house is the only thing on this flat earth that doesn't let the gale pass through it. In the modern world, we go to great lengths to separate ourselves from our food sources. We like our beef in plastic wrapped trays and our milk in cartons, preferably far away from the creatures that actually produce them. But out here, your livestock aren't just assets or potential burgers, they are your roommates. And more importantly, they are your living, breathing radiators. You see, a healthy 1,000-pound milk cow is essentially a biological furnace that runs on grass. Through the miracle of rumination, which is just a fancy word for a 4-stage fermentation process happening in their gut, a cow generates a massive amount of internal heat. A single cow can put out about 2,000 to 3,000 BTUs of heat per hour. To put that in modern terms, that's roughly equivalent to a high-end electric space heater running on its medium setting. If you have 2 cows and a team of oxen pressed against your wall, you effectively have a 4-unit heating system hugging your house. This leads to some of the most efficient, if slightly pungent, architectural choices in human history. Many homesteaders built their soddies with a shared wall design. You didn't build a house and then a separate barn 50 yards away. No, you built your house, and then you built the stable or the lean-to directly against the north or west wall. This was a mainstream historical fact of the era. The connected farmstead was a survival strategy. By housing your animals against the house, their collective body heat would warm the sod wall. The wall would absorb that heat and slowly radiate it into your living quarters. You were using your livestock as a thermal buffer. It was the original green energy solution, provided you don't mind the color green being associated with manure. But sometimes, when a blue norther hits, one of those terrifying blizzards where the temperature drops 40 degrees in an hour and the visibility goes to 0, the lean-to isn't enough. You hear the animals screaming in the wind. Their moisture-laden breath is freezing their nostrils shut. If they stay out there, they will be dead by morning, and your entire investment, your survival for next year, will be gone. So you do the unthinkable. You open the door. You lead the cow and the calves right into the house. It sounds like a comedy sketch, but for many pioneers, cohabitation was the only way to save the herd. You now have a 1,200-pound animal standing in your kitchen. She takes up a third of the floor space. Her head is level with your lantern. She's confused, she's wet, and she smells like a swamp that's been marinated in clover. There is a quirky, fringe detail in the diaries of prairie women regarding the cow in the kitchen scenario. They talk about the ASMR of survival. Once the initial chaos of bringing the animal in settles, the sound of a cow chewing her cud in the dark is remarkably soothing. It's a slow, rhythmic, grind/grind sound. In the absolute silence of a frozen night, that sound is proof of life. It's the sound of a biological engine idling. If the cow is chewing, she's warm. If she's warm, you might stay warm too. However, living with a cow, or Bessie the space heater, comes with a significant sensory tax. Within 20 minutes, the humidity in the room spikes. A cow exhales gallons of water vapor every day. The walls of your soddy start to sweat even more. The smell of ammonia and wet fur becomes a physical presence, something you can almost taste. It's a pungent, heavy aroma that clings to your quilts and your hair. You are no longer living in a house, you are living in a lung. This brings us to the zoonotic debate. Historians and medical scholars still argue whether this close proximity to livestock was the primary driver of the high rates of respiratory illness and prairie fever among settlers. Some argue that the thermal benefit of sharing a room with a cow was offset by the sheer volume of bacteria and parasites being introduced into a small, unventilated space. Did the cow save you from freezing only to give you tuberculosis or a devastating bout of the flu? It's a scholarly question that remains unresolved, but at 2 o'clock a.m. in a blizzard, you aren't thinking about germ theory. You are just leaning your cold back against the cow's warm flank and feeling grateful for the 101-degree body temperature she's generously sharing. You remember the three dog night we talked about? When the livestock are this close, it's more like a one cow night. The presence of the animals also changes the acoustic landscape of your sleep. You aren't just listening to the wind anymore. You hear the shifting of weight, the heavy thud of a hoof on the dirt floor, the occasional low grunt of a calf. It's a reminder that you aren't the only thing struggling to see the sunrise. There's a strange interspecies solidarity in that room. You are all just mammals, huddled together in a dirt box, trying to keep your internal fires lit while the universe tries to blow them out. Eventually, the cow settles down. She might even fold her legs and park herself right next to your bed. You can feel the heat radiating from her through the quilts. It's a heavy, moist, living heat. It's better than the soapstone. It's better than the buffalo chips. It's the heat of life itself. As you drift off, you realize that the boundaries of your world have shrunk down to like this one room. Your family, your dogs, your livestock, everyone is here. You are a single multi-species organism. You have survived the wind, the dark, and the cold by turning your home into a stable and your stable into a home. But as the cow's rhythmic breathing lulls you towards sleep, a different kind of cold begins to creep in. It's not the physical cold of the air, but the cold of the silence. Now that the work is done and the house is full, the prairie madness we touched on earlier begins to whisper. The isolation, the thousands of miles of empty grass outside the door, and the crushing weight of the silence start to press against your mind. You've fed your body, you've fueled the stove, and you've sheltered the herd. But now, you have to find a way to keep your mind from breaking in the dark. You are physically warm, or at least as warm as a human buried under 20 pounds of wool and pressed against a cow can be. But as the physical threat of the frost recedes into a dull, manageable ache, a new predator slips through the cracks of your sod walls. It's the silence, or rather, it's the lack of meaningful sound. In the modern world, you are never truly alone with your thoughts. You have a digital tether to the rest of humanity in your pocket. If you feel a twinge of boredom, you can summon the collective knowledge and entertainment of the entire species with a thumb swipe. But here, in the winter of 1874, your mental battery is at 1%, and there is no charger in sight. You are living in a permanent state of airplane mode, and the flight is scheduled to last for another 4 months. This is where the real mind games begin. Historians and psychologists still debate whether prairie madness was a clinical psychological condition, a specific form of environmental neurosis, or simply a natural human reaction to extreme sensory deprivation and social isolation. Standing on your roof in the summer, the prairie looks like freedom. But sitting in your dark burrow in the winter, the prairie feels like an ocean of nothingness that is slowly dissolving your sense of self. Without the regular pings of social interaction, your brain starts to hallucinate its own stimuli. You might find yourself having a heated 3-hour argument with the cow about the best way to plant spring wheat. And the terrifying part isn't that you're talking to a cow, it's that you're starting to find her counter-arguments quite persuasive. To combat this mental erosion, you cling to routine with a fervor that borders on the religious. Routine is the only thing that separates you from the void. You wash the same 2 tin plates with the same obsessive care every morning, even if they aren't dirty. You fold the quilts with military precision. You count the buffalo chips in your pile over and over again, not because the number changes, but because the act of counting is a tether to a world where logic and math still exist. It's the 19th century equivalent of checking your bank balance 10 times a day just to feel like you have control over your life. If you are lucky, you have the Bible of the Plains, the Sears, Roebuck, and Kirby catalog. While it was more common a bit later in the century, the early iterations or similar mail order circulars were the 19th century iPad. This wasn't just a book of things you couldn't afford, it was a window into an alternate dimension. You don't just read the catalog, you consume it. You memorize the descriptions of lace curtains, patent leather shoes, and mahogany dining tables. You and your family play a game where you each have a fictional budget of $50, and you spend the entire evening shopping. You debate the merits of a specific wood-burning stove versus another model as if you were choosing a new car. The catalog is a quirky fringe piece of frontier literature. It provided a narrative structure to your desires, allowing you to inhabit a world where you weren't covered in mud and smelling of bovine flatulence. But most of the time, your entertainment is even more primitive. You tell stories, not new stories. You ran out of those in December. You tell the old stories. You narrate the history of your family, the story of how your grandparents met, the detailed account of the great fire in your hometown, or the plot of the one Shakespeare play you saw when you were 10. You become a living archive. Oral tradition isn't just a fancy term for anthropologists, it is your nightly Netflix. You tell the same story so many times that the children can correct you if you skip a single adjective. "No, Papa," they whisper from the middle of the quilt pile. "The horse wasn't brown, it was chestnut." These stories are the reruns of the frontier, and they serve a vital purpose. They remind you that you have a history, that you came from somewhere, and that you are part of a sequence of events that didn't start and won't end in this dirt hole. Then there is the quirky, almost heartbreaking practice of dressing for the void. Some women's diaries mention the habit of putting on their finest Sunday best dress, the one with the silk ribbons and the tight corset, just to sit in the dark soddy and eat beans. It seems insane to wear high fashion finery in a mud hut, but it was a tactical strike against the environment. By wearing the clothes of a civilized woman, you were asserting that the prairie hadn't won yet. You were a lady who happened to be living in a burrow, not a burrow dweller who used to be a lady. It's a modern comparison to putting on a suit for a Zoom call while wearing pajama bottoms. A desperate attempt to maintain a professional identity in a domestic vacuum. The dark humor of the frontier also becomes a survival mechanism. You start making jokes about the wind, giving it a name, or pretending the howling is actually a very bad opera singer. Sarcasm is your shield. When a clump of dirt falls from the ceiling into your coffee, you don't cry. You make a joke about the extra minerals the government provides for free. If you don't laugh at the absurdity of your situation, the weight of it will crush your ribs. Scholarly debates often highlight that those who survived the winter with their sanity intact were often those with the most developed and often the darkest sense of humor. But sometimes the stories and the jokes aren't enough. There are nights when the wind hits a certain frequency, a low, vibrating hum that seems to resonate with the bones in your skull. This is the acoustic torture phase. You find yourself pacing the 12-foot length of the room like a caged tiger. You look at the door and have a sudden, overwhelming urge to run out into the blizzard, just to see something other than these four brown walls. You have to physically restrain yourself, or have your spouse hold you down until the fit passes. It's a mainstream historical fact that many families had to literally tie the door shut, not to keep the wolves out, but to keep the people in. As you lie there tonight, tucked into the family Tetris, you are narrating your own life in your head. You are describing the feeling of the wool against your chin, the smell of the banked fire, the sound of the cow's breath. You are turning your sensory experience into words. Because as long as you have words, you have a mind. You are the protagonist of a very long, very boring, very cold novel, and you are determined to see the final chapter. The candle has long since sputtered out, leaving only the faint, pulsing red glow of the stove's dampers to light the room. The mental gymnastics of the evening have exhausted you more than the physical labor of the day. Your brain is finally beginning to quiet down, the wish book dreams and the family legends blurring into a hazy, warm fog. You have managed to keep the prairie madness at the doorstep for one more night. Now, there is nothing left to do but surrender to the weight of the quilt and wait for the sun, if it decides to show up at all. You are drifting, the screaming wind outside finally fading into a background hiss, as you prepare for the final, deepest descent into the long winter night. The deep night has finally settled into your marrow. The world outside has ceased to be a place of geography and has become a place of pure, unadulterated sound. In the modern world, your house is a silent box of drywall and insulation that hums with the invisible pulse of electricity. If it makes a noise, you call a contractor. But here, your house is a living, breathing participant in the storm. It doesn't just sit in the cold. It reacts to it. The frozen sod walls are contracting, the moisture in the dirt turning to ice and expanding, causing deep, resonant booms that sound like heavy furniture being moved in the room above you, except you don't have a room above you. It's just the earth, groaning under the weight of the atmosphere. You lie there, perfectly still, listening to the house talk to itself. The cottonwood rafters, green when you cut them and now bone dry and brittle, give off sharp, sudden cracks as they shrink in the sub-zero air. It's like being inside the hull of a wooden ship in a heavy sea. You are navigating the winter, and every groan of the timber is a report on the structural integrity of your survival. You find yourself matching your breathing to the rhythm of the house. You are part of the architecture now. You look toward the small window, if you're lucky enough to have a pane of glass. It is no longer a portal to the outside world. It is a canvas. The frost has grown thick on the inside of the glass, a miniature forest of crystalline ferns and jagged silver needles. In the faint, dying glow of the stove, these frost flowers look like something from a dream. There's a quirky, fringed piece of folklore from the Great Plains that suggests you can read the frost like tea leaves, that the shapes of the crystals can predict how many weeks are left until the first thaw. You see a shape that looks like a wagon wheel, and you decide it means the spring will come early, even though your rational brain knows it just means the draft is coming from the lower left corner of the frame. Through the frost, you can't see the sun dogs or the moon rings that often haunt the prairie sky on nights like this. Optical illusions caused by ice crystals in the air that make it look like the sky has multiple suns or glowing halos. It's a mainstream historical fact that these phenomena often terrified early settlers who weren't prepared for the atmospheric theatrics of the plains. They thought the world was ending, or that they were seeing divine omens. To you, it's just more ice. Everything is ice. You think about the proving up process. According to the Homestead Act of 1862, the piece of legislation that lured you out here, you have to live on this land, cultivate it, and build a permanent structure for 5 years before the government hands you the deed. 5 years. You have currently completed about 3 months of your first winter, and it feels like you've been here since the dawn of time. You realize that the government isn't just giving land away, they are selling it for the price of your youth. The permanent structure you've built is currently shivering against the wind, and you wonder if the bureaucrats in Washington ever actually tried to sleep in a dirt box while a cow breathed on their feet. This brings up a perennial scholarly debate that historians love to argue about: the myth of the lone pioneer. Was the settlement of the West an act of rugged, masculine individualism, as the old textbooks claim? Or was it an act of radical, desperate communal interdependence? Standing alone, you would be dead. Your survival tonight is a result of 1,000 small, shared-eared efforts. The neighbor who helped you cut sod, the wife who spent months drying the corn, the children who gathered the buffalo chips, the grandmother back east who sent the quilts. You are a single knot in a very long, very frayed rope of human cooperation. The lone pioneer is a fiction. The reality is a huddle. There is a strange, quiet humor in the visual state of your yard right now. If you could see through the walls, you'd see your laundry. The shirts and trousers you washed and hung out weeks ago, standing perfectly upright on the line. They are frozen into solid white statues of yourself. There is a quirky historical tidbit that kids on the prairie would sometimes use frozen laundry as a stiff barrier to build snow forts, or as silent sentries to play pranks on unsuspecting travelers. You imagine your frozen trousers out there, standing guard against the blizzard, a hollow version of you facing the wind so the real you doesn't have to. It's a ridiculous thought, but it makes you smile in the dark. The soapstone at your feet is now just a lukewarm memory. The cow has stopped shifting her weight and has entered a deep, heavy sleep, her warmth a steady, damp pressure against the side of the bed. The children are silent, their breath a synchronized, soft puffing in the center of the pile. The air in the room has reached a state of equilibrium. It is cold, yes, but it is no longer moving. The drafts have been defeated by the frost itself, which has sealed the remaining cracks with ice. You feel a profound sense of buriedness. You are under the quilts, under the rafters, under the sod, and under the snow. You are in the safest, yes, wapest part of the world. The horizontal violence of the prairie wind is still happening, but it's happening on a different plane of existence. Down here, in the dark, in the quiet, in the huddle, you have found the center of the storm. You realize that tomorrow will be the same as today. You will break the ice in the bucket. You will shovel the ash. You will scavenge for fuel. You will chew on salty pork and roast grain. But tomorrow is a problem for a person who is awake, and you are no longer that person. Your thoughts are becoming fluid, losing their edges, turning into the same crystalline patterns as the frost on the window. You are no longer a homesteader or a survivor. You are just a heartbeat in a dark room. The weight of the quilts is the only reality left. You close your eyes, the last ember in the stove winking out, and you let the long, white silence of the prairie take you at last. The world outside is vast, an infinite stretch of white and gray, but that world has no power over the small, still space you inhabit now. The wind has become a lullaby, a distant, hollow song that tells you the roof is holding, the walls are firm, and the earth is keeping its promise to shield you. Feel the incredible weight of the blankets pressing down on you. A heavy, warm embrace that anchors you to this moment, to this bed, to this life. Your breathing is slow now, as deep and steady as the roots of the grass sleeping beneath the snow. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to go, and no more fire to tend. The cold is a far-off memory, and the warmth of the huddle is your entire universe. You are safe. You are hidden. You are exactly where you need to be. Listen to the quiet rhythm of the house, the soft, rhythmic breathing of your family, and the heavy, peaceful silence of the earth. Let the darkness be soft, like velvet, folding around you, tucking you into the long, winter sleep that heals all things. Every muscle in your body is heavy, sinking into the soft straw, drifting into the deep, dreamless quiet of the plains. The night is long, but it is kind. Sleep now. Let the world drift away. Sweet dreams of spring.